Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Dan Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And while others are, I guess, already celebrating early the 4th of July and there's other stuff going on this weekend, we have work to do. We have to still talk about the Empire beating down the Salt Lake Shred and all that stuff. So, Matt, can you indulge me before the fireworks begin?
Yeah. I just realized when you said 4th of July, I should have worn my limited edition 2014 New York Empire shirt that only like 10 of us still have. Relics. I feel bad now, but that's okay. The game was, there were fireworks, I guess.
Yeah.
One side. I don't know. Maybe there were fireworks. It all seemed very routine, and despite a lot of turns, and you would think it'd be more exciting, but for some reason the game was not. I don't know. It wasn't the heavyweight matchup I think everybody was expecting. I didn't get to watch the game live. I was at like a memorial service for family, and I got a text afterwards from Mike Drost in like a group chat, and it just said like undefeated in Hartford. So, the game was kind of spoiled for me, which was fine. But then I went to look at the score and I saw, just how lopsided it was. And I thought like, oh man, this is going to be something to watch. And then, Empire played great. There's lots to talk about, especially the defense, but it was ugly and there were a lot of mistakes. And, I guess it just not what I expected before I saw the text. After I saw the text, everything just kind of all over the place.
Well, the only other housekeep I have, because again, the whole show basically today, because the Empire off next weekend, is to talk, or this weekend, I should say, is to talk about the game against Salt Lake. So the other housekeeping is that, one, we want to wish, of course, a congratulations to Antoine Davis getting married this weekend. His fiance is consistently at the games and a wonderful person to speak to and see at the games. So happiest to both of those two and that ceremony this weekend. And then, as you mentioned, kind of transitioning into our little shop, empireultimate.com. The 4th of July special edition from 2014 is not available, but it's another indication that it's been said a few times, and we're going to keep putting it out there, that if the whole league, maybe every team picks a retro throwback for next season and then tries to sell that one, I feel like it would work out. And you see about some of the defunct teams, if there's some kind of throwback rights you could acquire. Again, this is way above my pay grade, but all I'm saying is it's ideas. I've heard a lot of different things from people throughout the league, and I think throwback stuff would go a long way, especially, I might be looking for some San Francisco Flamethrowers stuff. I don't know about that. And then, of course, Keith Rayner, who's in the booth with me and was up in the booth at Hartford, he's an old member of the Columbus Cranes, and he can't even find stuff in his own closet. So
he said he's got like one T-shirt. Yeah,
exactly. So, all right, we have to talk about the game. And to speak about the game, as you said, it is kind of like we're gliding into it. And it's funny enough because the first point of the game, I think, to that point, we spoke about how the personality of the star player on a day can affect the way that a game is personified. And I think Marques Brownlee, being the player of the game, having the game that he did, and also snagging that, it was just a poach block. The first block of the game even was just almost a routine poach block. Marques just snatched it out of the air with those long arms and one throw into the end zone to Axel Agami-Contreras, and the Empire have broken to start the game. And that kind of felt like where that game got its theme from, I guess we'll say. And having a personality like Marques be your best player does, as I said, kind of look in the mirror as to what that game was, with Marques having not only a fantastic game, but you were with him for his early parts. And I know he played for Philly as well. And going back to his MLU Rumble days, he put up some huge numbers then, but I don't know if it was like an amazing game and win victories, even though the stats are great, but a plus 6, I should say, 5 assists, 3 blocks, only 147 total yards, but the D-line really was sharing the wealth there. 1 hat trick, or 1 hockey assist, I should say, 1 turnover, and he did have the 1 drop. But for Marques, arguably the best game he's played in an Empire uniform.
Statistically, sure. It's interesting because, a lot of those handler defenders, when they play really well, you don't always accrue a lot of blocks. I mean, if you look at Marques' stats over the last few years, the blocks are not popping off the pages. I think in 2019, he missed a few games when he hurt his leg, but he still played in the bulk of them. I think he got 1 block. It was only 1 more than me on the D-line. And he's a better defender for sure. But you don't always see the numbers popping off the page. I mean, sometimes it's those downfield cutter defenders that typically accrue more blocks because that, the throws are longer. There's more time to track them down. There's more time to adjust, more time for wind to interfere. It's just they get more blocks in general. So, week to week, I think Marques is playing really, really high level, and, he's shutting people down, which doesn't always result in a throw going near him. This was nice. They tried to cram a few through, and he just, he picked off three, very quick. Just that snag was so quick. It's nice to see that he actually got some blocks to go with it, to put on the stat page. But yeah, and then offensively, he played great on the other side of it too. He just quick, easy, nice floaty throws to Agami, and yeah, he looked great. It's nice that he actually got recognized as like player of the game because, the team has been so star-studded for so long that some of those D-line guys get overlooked. They never even sniff a chance at player of the game unless you're also accruing, 4 goals, 5 assists. So yeah, awesome that he got some recognition for it.
Well, actually, I'll give you a number that does actually give him recognition here. In the game, his primary matchup, and the matchups did switch, even by the second quarter when Salt Lake started to put in D-line players on their O-line when they've been broken a few times. So matchups were kind of thrown out the window basically by midway through the second. However, game plan-wise, both Marques, Anthony Nunez, Cat Stevens, everybody I spoke to said, hey, we did our homework the right way against Salt Lake. We prepared for DC, we prepared for Salt Lake in such a way that we were ready for their first, second, and third options, and they were really proud of the homework that they had done before the game. And both, again, coaches and players all said that is why we won this game by what we did. And so the number I have for you is Marquez's primary matchup was Jacob Miller. That was the guy he watched film on. That was the guy he prepared for. And Jacob Miller in the game had the 1 assist, but he only had 13 total completions. Even though he didn't have a turnover, 92%, he had 13 total completions, did Jacob Miller, and he averages 38 completions per game. So a guy who's always
that's huge.
Exactly. So a guy who's always touching the disc, to shut him down completely and unequivocally, it shows you the pressure that he was put on. And then Axel Agami and Liam Haberfield on Luke Jorgensen. Luke Jorgensen, now he is one of the only Salt Lake players that doesn't really have it's a lot of high risk, high reward with Luke Jorgensen. He is kind of one of those X factors in terms of good things happen or bad things happen in games. But for him, a -5 on the day he had just 1 hockey assist and 5 turnovers. And Axel Agami Contreras and Haberfield, it's hard to ask much more of what they did in that game. And Agami, when you look down for what he had, he had a +4 in the game, 3 goals and the 1 block. He had 63 total yards. But again, the stats don't really matter. You've been talking about pressure defense, and the concern was without Solomon Marishmeyer-Bailey, Ethan Fortin then moved over to the O-line, and that meant, again, that Axel Agami Contreras was playing quite a bit with the D2 this season, then moved up to the D1, because, again, Ethan then moved over to O-line, and he looked like he had been with that group the entire season, looked completely comfortable. And the other player I'm going to shout out right at the top here is, it cannot be understated, the nightmare that Breton Tan was for Grant Lindsley. You and I have been watching Grant for 15 years now. And
forever.
Maybe you could do better than me with this, but I would love to ask Grant as well. So I don't know if why would Grant listen to this show in particular, but if Grant is listening, Grant, I would love to hear your top 3 or top 5 defenders you've ever had, because of what I've ever always seen of Breton Tan against Grant Lindsley in their matchups in a short sample size. Breton has to be a top 3 to 5 Grant Lindsley defender of all time. It's just like there's no, he has Grant's number in a way that you never see happen to Grant Lindsley.
Yeah, they shut them down at like every point of attack, every little instance. And you were talking about Axel's like low yardage, and I think that's just because all those turns were short field and they just scored after like a quick throw. So obviously there's no yardage to accrue when you just shut them down at their own like brick mark, and then you roll from there. As far as Grant, the turns were bad. He threw into the poach once or twice, and then he tried to hook deep, and they just weren't going. And you can chalk 1 or 2 of those up in the course of a game. I heard it was kind of swirly, windy, weird in the stadium, even if it wasn't like incredibly windy. And you could see that on throws from both teams. It just, they thought they had people, and then either the throw was like half a second late or the wind really picked up and just kind of thwarted the nice deep pass you thought you were making, and there were a lot of like jump ball garbage things. But 5 turns is too many when your team is like not playing well and you have somebody else also throwing 5 turns. It's just the game got so messy that, I don't know if Grant thought he needed to win with his arm when he did have the disc, or if, just kind of everything just fell apart and the whole team didn't play well. But yeah, I mean, Brenton Tan is a very good defender. He got that nice foot block on Jordan Kerr towards the end of the game. So yeah, I mean, he's one of the better defenders on the team in the league. And it's not always like massive blocks he's putting out there. It's just kind of being in the right space at the right time. Kind of like an Empire defensive trait for everybody not named Antoine at this point. They're just always picking the right spots and getting there.
Well, in that early 4-0 run, speaking of Antoine, who in this game got shut down pretty early, actually. Only played 14 points, which was, third lowest or fourth lowest on the team in total points on the day. So he got shut down pretty early because with that block on Jordan Kerr in the first quarter, second point of the game, it did also kind of set their matchup as well. Because there were, of course, you want to push the stars. And he won MVP of the championship weekend last year because of his defensive efforts against Kyle Henke and Jordan Kerr in those 2 games against Austin and Salt Lake. And so for Antoine, maybe, he just wanted to stop the day early so he could prepare for the wedding. Didn't want to get hurt, anything like that. Of course, wants to look good for his funny weekend, sure. But totally.
When you're rolling that much, just take me out. I'm a rest. I don't need a broken nose. Who knows what? You chill. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to defend Kerr, but I do want to say that while he did have just the 1 goal, the 1 assist, and what was the stat on Jordan Kerr? It's that he was held under triple digits in both throwing yards and receiving yards for the first time in his career, which is pretty incredible. Going back even to championship weekend or even his time with Oakland when they weren't necessarily picking up wins. But for Antoine to set the tone as well in that way, to defend Kerr a little bit, is that he clearly has a broken hand. And I know that it was his off throwing hand, so it shouldn't be that affecting that.
No, it doesn't. It does not matter. It affects everything. I got, my stupid dogs were like playing once. I got my hand in there. I had like a puncture wound before one of the Empire seasons, and I had to practice with my hand very similar to him, not quite as bulky, but like all just bandaged up. And it was my right hand, so it didn't affect throws, but it just affects everything you're doing. Every little bit, every catch you have to think about a little harder. If something's off to the side, you can't necessarily grab it. So then you're just kind of thinking and aware of it. And then even throwing and adjusting, like, I was trying to keep an eye on it when he was like pivoting, was he using his offhand to like adjust the disc a little bit? And he kind of was, but like, it just affects everything. It throws your balance off. It just every little thing. So, when you're that good, you like a little bit of an impact and play fine, but you're going up against some of the best defenders and the New York Empire, who also seem to be getting better and better and better as the weeks progress. Good enough isn't really going to do it. I mean, we needed to see MVP caliber Jordan Kerr out there, not, broken hand kind of playing at 80%. I mean, then it just reduces him to another okay player on the team.
Well, and I think in this interdivisional matchup, the fact that the Empire won the way they did, we even saw, having watched the DC game the night before against Carolina, when Boston, DC, and New York, the top teams in the East, and I would say 3 of the top 7 championship contenders or whatever you want to call it,
I would say like 3 out of 5 at this point.
Maybe, 3, 5, or 6. So when those 3 teams are really rolling and things are working for them, there is something very boring about it, because Marques even said after the game, the goal for them, without Jordan Kerr being the variable, because he can be and should be the tempo setter for Salt Lake. He is the thing that is open in the middle field. He's the one that extends the field and big yardage underneath, or obviously those throws and the edge that he puts on discs is hard to argue without Brian Oscar in the league this year that he's not best. I mean, arguably top 3 in the league in that too. So without him really setting the tempo in that way, because as you mentioned, he's thinking about every catch and getting pressure from Antoine behind him to start that game. So then that means that everybody else on those short throws who want to throw fast and figure it out, first play of the game when Marques gets that poach block, and then even the one that Grant threw into the end zone that Sam Alston, who was making his season debut, actually Empire debut, he was on the 2020 COVID team, and obviously the season gets canceled. He gets hurt and finally returns. So after waiting 4 years, basically, congratulations Sam Alston finally making his debut with the 2 assists rather, and 1 block. So big day for him. And then Bobby Elston also, by the way, with Rothman Orthopedics, one of our sponsors. Shout out to them, working through his ACL injury. He had to wait 2 years as well on the sideline now to come back to the lineup after the ACL injury. 1 assist for him, 1 block, a +2. So anyway, season debuts for them. Congratulations to them. But when Sam Alston got that block on Grant in the on that poach block, that was that tempo. It was that the Empire were able to slow Salt Lake down to a point where they were throwing into these poaches, and they had to think for a second or two more. They want to get, that being Salt Lake wants to get that disc out of their hands in the first 2 to 4 seconds of the stall count. And the fact that the Empire made them wait to 5 or 6 so many times, it threw their whole rhythm down, and it meant that the game was going at their tempo. And, looking ahead, not too far, but to DC, because they've got Minnesota first on the road next Friday. But looking at DC, like, it's almost a fight to 17 points. That's what it feels like, a fight to 17 or 18. And whoever can kind of slow the game down their way is the team that's going to win those kind of games in the East.
The thing that Atlanta, DC, and Boston all did really well, and New York themselves do really well at times, is they are content to just grind, take easy resets, dump the disc super far backwards. Like, they're not trying to score in 15 seconds all the time. They are willing to just kind of duke it out with you and go as slow and as methodical as they need to be. And yeah, every team on occasion has a bad throw, like a rushed throw, a deep shot that doesn't pan out, and you think like, oh, we should have just dumped it. But over the course of the game, like, those 3 teams in the East and Atlanta, they really, really just have taken their time. And yeah, that was why almost lost my AirPod. That was why Salt Lake, they struggled. They didn't want to do that. They didn't really they just kept throwing into the middle of the field when they didn't need to, and then Empire players were there too fast, too strong, too big. I mean, they picked off things short, they picked off things long. They let Salt Lake throw into adverse windy conditions, and even when Empire players didn't get a block, the throw just wasn't good. So they didn't grind it out like they're going to need to against such a solid defensive unit.
Yeah, so a few more personal shout outs in terms of defensive performances and stuff. Sam Jonas, I wouldn't say that was his coming out party. We know that he's kind of had capabilities, and I think he's already showing that. We talk about D1 and D2, but he's gone from, is he going to be in the 20s, to this guy's definitely in the 20. 1 goal, 1 assist, 3 blocks. He can handle more than people expect he can. He moves the disc well. He's a great athlete, really good pressure defense. So Sam Jonas, as much as I'd love to try to keep him quiet, I think people in the league are, especially because this is a national game, I think people are kind of figuring out who he is and getting more used to him. And then again, Liam Haberfield, 3 goals, the 1 assist, and he did have 1 turnover, so back in the turnover category, but said Liam's defense on Luke Jorgensen was fantastic in the game. And then Matt Labar, he, in the contest, played 14 D points, 2 O points, the 4 goals, 138 total yards. He did have the 1 turnover and the 1 hockey assist, but Matt Labar continues to be a factor. And I think watching that game and the D-line being what it was, what you felt like it finally was, that it was against championship weekend, I think for the first time without Jeff Babbitt this season, because remember, he was on the D-line for championship weekend. And this was the first game, I think, this year where I said, oh, this D-line looks just as good at championship weekend, especially when they shut down Jeff Babbitt in those games when it got out of hand against Austin. So now you had this D-line, and again, they look deep, they look stronger, and it makes you think that if the Empire are going to win the championship this season, we're going to bring up names, maybe not say the stars, but we're going to bring up names like Sam Jonas, Axel Agami Contreras, of course, the Dross twins doing what they do. And then even Ando Olchesi actually played phenomenally in that game. He was the other defender along with Marquez on Jacob Miller. So the other credit goes to Angelo on that D2 coming in. And he's another guy that I think around the league, they don't consider him like a handler because he's a guy that, barely makes the 20 sometimes, but it's a talented 20. And Angelo, I think Salt Lake would have loved to have him playing for their team over the weekend, and he was just another factor there. So there's so many of these pieces, Shankalati as well, that if their D-line is up to it, that clearly the depth of their D-line, as well as Carolina, as well as DC, and I think Boston's a little more top-heavy. No offense to Boston, but I do think Boston's a little more top-heavy than the other 3 I just mentioned. But those are teams that can be deep. And if their role players really go out and do what they did, you're going to be in good shape. As well as even Josue Loro, if they can come back for the playoffs, that would be a good sign. I'm not sure about their availability. They're probably out the regular season, but that's another body.
Yeah, the depth is what will set this team apart when they really need to, because they are going to get contributions from everybody. And I think the coaching staff did a great job of not really. There were 1 or 2 points early in the game where it felt like they played like a D2 version of a line, but for the most part, it felt like they played D1 and just rotated the pieces in, which is something we had been talking about, week after week. If they could kind of dial in how they approach some of these, top tier teams, they could probably play better defense throughout the course of a game. And sure enough, I mean, their foot was on the gas right from the get-go. They never really let up. And this was the first time the defense really, truly looked like the team from the last few years. You beat up on Toronto, whatever, but, that's no offense to them. It's Toronto. They're not really a great offensive team this year. This looked like what the Empire defense is and will need to be moving forward to potentially win another championship. And, I couldn't really figure out what was wrong with the defense other than we ran D2 probably too much in the beginning of the season. It still felt like they were loaded with good players, but they couldn't seem to put it all together. And whatever they did, whatever they talked about, maybe just slowly building throughout the course of the season, they look ready now to, they're putting teams on notice. We're ready. We're here. We're going to make it hard. And if they do that, I think they can beat anybody.
Well, I think something that's also gone in their favor is that, unlike previous seasons, like we talked about, for better or worse, they're now at a point where they're becoming healthier and getting more available. I said Josue is out, but aside from that, they pretty much are getting their faces and names back. And I know Saul missed this one, but they and actually,
sorry, cut you off. That's what I wanted to say. We didn't even talk about John Randolph. I don't even think we said his name yet. I mean, he wasn't available. He's one of the best players on the team, and they didn't have him for offense or defense, which, as you mentioned, let Matt LeBar kind of get a little more playtime here and there on offense and defense. But yeah, I mean, they did all of this without John Randolph too. I mean, the defense. Yeah, I don't know how the coaches are going to pick their final 20 when you're looking for who's going to fill out that defense towards the end of the season or into the playoffs. But it's a good problem to have. I mean, as you said, even if you guys that just came back from long-standing injuries, they show up and they get some blocks. They get on the score sheet. I mean, they looked good out there.
Well, it's about the floor, too. As I said, Breton Tan had missed a few weeks, and it wasn't through injury. It was through other things. So for Breton, he raises your floor so much. And if your other role players continue to raise your floor as well, I mean, even, again, the homework that you put into it, that it wasn't again, Bobby Elston it was both he and Ryan Dross against Dunabile to start the game. And that's two very different defenders against Dunabile. And on paper, Dunabile against Elston looks like a big mismatch where Dunabile should be able to get a lot of underwork and a lot of big yardage gains. But Bobby played him in such a way that he would, that being Bobby, his teammates on the sideline especially were talking to him so well that he would jump those lanes and he would help in behind. And if you could have, Bobby is a traditional defensive big, right? Where you're going to expect to have him be the help over the top, or, you're going to trust him in the air deep, and you're going to try to force those guys to 50-50 him in the air. But the fact that he was able to jump those lanes, knowing that there was help in behind, that allowed him to defend Dunabile the same way that Ryan Dross was playing Dunabile, which was what was having them struggle. Meaning the same spaces that Dunabile wasn't having space against Ryan Dross, he was also not having that same space against Bobby Elston. So again, this is a marker of, if the Empire now can also do their homework, and not to say that those road trips or earlier in the season they weren't doing their homework, but now they know the teams that they have to go against. And I feel even like the teams that they have left on the schedule are teams that they have a lot of tape of, except in Minnesota. But they actually have said they've been watching tape from Minnesota this whole year.
Hey Ryan, have you ever thought to yourself how you could fit everything you need for one weekend into a single bag?
And there's an incredible layout block.
Oh, there's a Callahan. Mike Dross did it for New York.
From cleats to jerseys to discs, pennies, water bottles, the greatest bag can help.
And this is going to be a greatest here.
This is going to be a Callahan for Ryan Drost.
Thanks to Greatest Bag for being a sponsor of the New York Empire.
In case we don't do a show next weekend, because not you, Matt, I know you're in your basement, but the other co-host here is potentially moving. Not potentially, he's definitely moving, but it's happening in the next week or two. So he has some packing to do. So in case we don't get to a podcast next week while the Empire heading out to Minnesota, that is a matchup that I don't want to say the Empire, it's interesting because it is must win if they want to host. Now, obviously, it's not must win. They've already clinched the playoffs, but it feels like they are the step above, the tier above Minnesota. But it's also, as we saw Minnesota Salt Lake in the playoffs, this is a big test for Minnesota. It says actually more, I think, about Minnesota at home to take on the Empire and beat the Empire than it does even about the Empire if they go to lose. But if the Empire don't get the win there, that means that game against DC, which I think we all have our eyes on already, which should decide who hosts then that 2-3 matchup, because Boston will likely beat Toronto and Montreal, unless, hey, Montreal and Toronto, if you want to do a favor to the Empire and the Breeze, like, that'd be great. But again, on paper, it says that the Boston will host the East Division this season. And so that's going to leave DC, the Empire, unless the Empire don't beat Minnesota. So it's hard to even say who's that a bigger game for, Minnesota or the Empire. But Minnesota's also going to be at home. And I mean, are we going to call this the I guess it's the Ben Yacht Classic, because Ryan Osgar not playing for either team. So it really is kind of the Ben Yacht Classic.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know who it's a bigger game for, because I could go either way on that. I know that Empire has really prided themselves the last few seasons of scheduling the harder games and going out west and playing, the best teams they can during the regular season to really, really prepare themselves for the postseason. And it's panned out. They've had phenomenal success. So yeah, I mean, if they can game plan well and take it to Minnesota, that's big. But, should they lose, because Minnesota is also very good, obviously a huge win for Minnesota, then obviously that'll give the team all the confidence in the world moving into their playoffs and potentially championship weekend, knowing they can beat one of the other teams outside of their own division. But yeah, even if Empire were to lose, I feel like as long as they approach the game well and feel like they can learn a little bit from it, they're in an okay position. As you said, they know they're clinched in the playoffs. So, you want to beat DC, but if you also want to give one or two players on the lower end of the roster their last chance to prove if they should be on the playoff 20, that's fine. You can probably afford to give up a point or two here and there because you play a slightly weaker D-line. I mean, obviously, team-wide, you want to win all those games. You want to do everything in your power to prepare to the best of your ability. But, you can probably let guy number 21, 22, 23 play if somebody's out or needs a break or just like a little nagging injury. Like, why don't we sit you this way you're fully healthy for next week, and then kind of see, and then you can kind of figure out your 20. There's opportunity there. So I'd be curious to see. I know they're going to approach it to win both of those games, but if they don't, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, the Empire also then do have the fortune of having a week off to watch film and to completely prepare for that. And as I said, it is a homecoming for Ben Yacht, of course. His family lives out there. He played on the Wind Chill in the past. And it is also the Charles Weinberg Classic, but kind of a mini classic because, again, he's from the Philadelphia area originally, went out to Minnesota where he went to grad school, having gone from Delaware. So it's, again, kind of mini Charles Weinberg because he did play for the Wind Chill for a hot second there. Then after that, so that is Friday, July the 12th. So that's next Friday, 7 p.m. Central Time, which I know how to do math. So that means it's 8 p.m. start time on the East Coast here. Again, most of the people who probably listen to this are Empire fans. So 8 p.m. East Coast time, Friday the 12th. And then Trinity Health Stadium, they return to host the DC Breeze, which if they do beat Minnesota, that game will likely be to see who hosts then the first round of the East Division playoffs. That is 6 p.m. on Saturday the 20th up in Hartford, Connecticut at Trinity Health Stadium. You can get your tickets online, shop empireultimate.com already. And we're hoping to fill that stadium out. The video, I help our cameraman Ben with the video board and the PA system, and it just there is a bigger feel about that stadium. It is. It's a bigger stadium, and it hosts a professional soccer team. So there is something. There's locker rooms even. Haven't gone to locker rooms like everybody gets their own locker. There's a different feel to it, and I think that game certainly, no matter what, will have a playoff feel to it. DC Empire, even if it's not for the 2-3 spot, even if DC already has it, that game is going to feel like playoffs because, again, they're likely going to then play each other in the following weeks in the playoffs.
Yeah, it seems likely unless, like you said, a Canadian team upsets Boston, which I'm not really banking on. So you would assume that it's going to be DC New York for that 2-3 game. And yeah, I don't know. You don't necessarily have to put a lot of weight on that game. I know both teams will want to win it, but anything can happen. In 2018, DC beat us really badly in like the last regular season game. We lost by maybe upwards of 10. Just wasn't great. We were just kind of out of sync, and they really just took it to us. It was hot. And we had to play them in the playoffs like a week or two later. And I remember thinking going into that game, like, oh, are they just going to roll us again? Like, that sucked. Like, I think we're better than that. I feel like that was an anomaly, but they beat us so badly, you just don't know what to expect. And then we had the monsoon, which is the worst game I've ever played in, weather-wise. And it just suited us, and it didn't suit them, and we beat them pretty soundly in, like, horrible adverse conditions. And the rest was history. So, I mean, I don't expect the monsoon to roll through in the playoffs. That was pretty crazy. But nobody scored in the fourth quarter, for anybody who doesn't know. It was wild. But yeah, I mean, you never know. It could be a little windy. There's so many different things that could happen. So yeah, it's hard to take stock in it, but I know that both teams will play it hard. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Empire have a great stretch here. Salt Lake, Minnesota, potentially DC, Boston championship weekend. I mean, it doesn't get much more exciting than that for a fan. You're basically just plucking all the best teams from all the divisions and seeing if you can run the gauntlet on everybody. So
yeah, and it gives us something to talk about, because for the last 2 seasons, they just peaked the entire season. And now this year,
yeah,
peak at the right time. So again, if they want to peak at the right time, it's Minnesota next Friday at 8 p.m. East Coast time on the 12th up in Minnesota, and then 6 p.m. rather East Coast time on the 20th, Saturday, Trinity Health Stadium in Hartford, Connecticut. So again, get your tickets, shopempireultimate.com for Pippin and myself. We will see you there.